Today we're joined by a fascinating guest and friend of the show, Cody Barrow. He's the CEO of EclecticIQ, a global leader in threat intelligence and cyber defense. Cody's journey spans intelligence work, cyber operations, and now leads a company that's redefining how organizations detect and respond to threats. All right, let's get started. Cody, can you tell me about yourself and how you got into the realm of cybersecurity? You've worked in the US defense and intelligence industries, and you've eventually ended up becoming a CEO. What inspired that transition?
Well, thanks a lot, Rob. It's, I would say, so I've been in the intelligence domain for almost 22 years. And so it has been an unusual journey. We used to say circuitous. So I am an American, but I live in the Netherlands, and I run a European business. So I have the honor of serving as the CEO of EclecticIQ, as you mentioned, and we are fully European-owned, but we serve global customers. So we service primarily large enterprises and national defense organizations in Europe, of course, but also Asia and the United States. And for me, actually, I started, maybe some of your audience can relate, some not as much, but I started in the 90s on something called Internet Relay Chat on IRC.
IRCs, yeah.
That's right. And so for those who don't know, IRC is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, online chat protocols. I think it originally came out in the early 80s, mid-80s. And that was my introduction to sort of the internet underground, to the cyber underground, right? And something about IRC in the 1990s, and maybe also still now, is there were a lot of unsavory characters. And so you would find Star Trek channels, of which I was a member, of course. You would find, but also you would find hacker channels, right? And so throughout the 90s, I sort of had this vision that wouldn't it be cool if I could join something like the National Security Agency and monitor all these guys? A little bit weird maybe, but on IRC, everybody was always thinking about who worked for NSA, because they figured somebody must work for NSA because it's all this hacker, cracker, underground stuff. And so long story short, I joined the United States Air Force as an electronic signals intelligence analyst. So not quite NSA yet. I was mostly analyzing radar signals and electronic emissions from adversary hardware to prevent our aircraft from being shot down and things like that. But then it wasn't long before I joined the NSA. We just say NSA, no the. And I was a founding member of United States Cyber Command, also technically an employee of the Defense Intelligence Agency, gets into some bureaucratic soup. But I was at NSA for Cyber Command as a DIA employee. And so I built that, or I was one of the establishment team members that helped to build Cyber Command, which was really like a very well-funded startup 15, 16 years ago. And then I went back to the Pentagon, where I did support to special operations and cyber and information operations, and really things that don't exist, right? So things I could never discuss, but some very interesting critical missions for special access programs. Before too long, after my 10-year mark, I wanted to kind of join the real world, and found my way to Fannie Mae, helping to safeguard, at the time, $3.4 trillion in U.S. assets and in mortgage-backed securities primarily from cyber attacks as the head of threat intelligence. And then I became a builder at a threat intelligence company called Recorded Future. Very good experience there. But before long, I wanted to move to Europe. I'd had some exposure to Sweden through Recorded Future. and kind of had exactly the right moment in my life. No children. At that time, I was not married, and at that time, I had no mortgage. So, crossed the ocean and found this company. And a couple years ago, they asked me to be CEO, and so here I am, leading the business.
What a fascinating story. And I think a lot of people in our industry actually have that start. And what we say in Australia, it's like Queen and Country, and let's just join a financial services or somewhere else where you can make, I guess, a little bit more bank. A lot to unpack in there. You mentioned IRCs. What would you say would be the equivalent of an IRC today? Do you think it would be like a Discord?
Definitely Discord. So first of all, I will confess I am in IRC still. It's been how long? I don't know, 30 years, which is crazy. But I am still in some IRC channels, not the unsavory ones, don't worry. But it still survives. But I think actually, yes, today a lot of your audience would recognize Discord. To some extent, Telegram, but mostly Discord.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's always fascinating when you are on those types of channels. Every time I'm on there, I'm thinking in the back of my head, who's NSA or who's the CIA or who is this person actually really? Or is it just a chatbot? Quite fascinating.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, you mentioned earlier that obviously you're based in the Netherlands. What cultural or regulatory advantages or challenges does operating in Europe bring to, let's say, in comparison to the United States?
There are a lot of different avenues on that. I think one of the challenges I like to discuss right up front is there's a major difference in the sort of people that you can hire. And not better or worse, but generally you'll find European talent, mostly continental European talent, hold that thought, is more technical, less experienced with the national security background that we just mentioned, less likely to have emerged into cybersecurity from an intelligence service, and usually very smart with either coding or sometimes hacking and cracking systems and things like that, versus the U.S. talent pool and the UK talent pools have a much deeper national security pipeline. So I don't know the latest stats, but a huge proportion of cybersecurity professionals have worked in national security, probably in Australia also, really. And that's not the case on the continent. So you find that you're generally teaching those people more about how to think from an intelligence strategy standpoint, versus on this side of the ocean in the U.S., it's the other way around. It's easier to find people who can think about the long-term strategy but have less technical skill. Generalizations, but this is normally what you find. That's one point.
So would you say it's more opportunity, more strategic, or is it lifestyle? It's a big change to go across the pond.
For me, or for those for people in general?
Just people in general.
I think there's definitely a lifestyle difference. So I think everybody knows about the work-life balance, the labor laws and things like that, labor protections. But it's notable because actually that gets into the second major issue that I often mention. As a business leader and as a really now European business leader, probably the biggest change between the U.S. and Europe is labor laws. So in the U.S., it's very easy to hire and fire. So you hire fast and fire fast. Not everybody loves it, but it does allow for more risk-taking, higher salaries, things like that. In Europe, much stronger labor protections, so you're much more cautious about hiring as a leader, right? Because it's much more costly to ask somebody to leave. So that has cascading effects. And in the European Union, you have 27 member states. So obviously the U.S. has 50 states, but it also has Washington, D.C., which runs that federal system. So it's one country, generally one set of harmonized rules. Of course, you have state-by-state differences, but generally one federal tax system, and then you have the states as an extra layer, but it's one language, harmonized economy. In the European Union, with 27 member states, you have a lot of fragmentation. So different languages, different cultures, dramatically different labor laws, different approaches to selling into each member state. So that results in a lot more friction for European business than in the U.S.
Just curious, what's the startup culture there like?
The startup culture is there's an energy to it, especially in the last year or so, when you've seen this kind of theme of European sovereignty really strengthen, meaning Europe, and when I say Europe, I mean the EU. You can often maybe view it as EU plus one with the UK, but really the European Union is like an elephant that's been sleeping, right? And when it awakens, it takes a long time to stand up. But when it does, it's up. Europe is an elephant standing up, right? And so the startup culture is energetic and fun, but it's not extremely well funded. You have a lot of early stage funding, that's fine, so you can get off the ground. But then when you're trying to grow and scale and go big, in the US, they're going to throw $20, $30 million at you and say, maybe you win, maybe you lose. It's not that big of a deal because I have 99 other bets. In Europe, they may have 99 other bets, but they don't want any of them to lose. They're much more attached to that sort of risk aversion, so the funding is lower, and that results in a bit slower growth. So it's energetic. There's a sort of spirit that's reawakening, but it has a long way to go.
Yep. It's a great observation because obviously when I moved here, everyone that I spoke to in the United States, it's very US-centric, and they forget there's a whole world out there. So unless you're well-traveled, you don't actually get to see those observations. So that's really well put. All right, let's get on to the next question. Let's talk about the company, but before we do, generally my audience includes K through to year 12, the elderly, C-level executives, all the non-technical people. Can you give us an oversimplified explanation of what your company does?
Yeah. So think of, we say left of boom. Mm-hmm. So we help you stay left of boom. So what does that mean? That means that if you think of a timeline and bad things happen when there's an explosion. So in Star Wars, not to say the Empire was the good guys, they were the bad guys, all right. But in Star Wars, if you were to think from the Empire's perspective, then if you've seen that show Andor or seen Rogue One, those are threat actors against the Empire trying to steal the plans to the Death Star, right? It's all, and I'm not going to spoil Andor, great show, but they're trying to steal the plans to the Death Star, right? And we help you understand the threat landscape so that you know that's happening, or you can prevent that so that there's no boom. Nobody disrupts your service availability, steals your confidential information, damages your organization's reputation, and other things that chief information security officers worry about and CEOs worry about. And we do that by showing large enterprises, so very large companies, and national defense organizations, so intelligence organizations, ministries of defense, and so on and so forth. We help them analyze the entire cyber threat landscape. Who are the bad guys out there? Who's not a bad guy? Who might actually attack me? And are they an actual threat? And by threat, it's a very simple formula. Adversary capability plus adversary intent. So is there someone out there who has the intent to harm me and the capability? And if they have both of those things, they're a threat.
Yep. And would you say it's more nation state, organized crime, or your script kiddie? What's going on out there in the threat landscape today?
It's all of those things, right? I think, and it's kind of cliche to say, but it's increasingly nation state. And that's because not just the increasing sophistication and knowledge and development of national cyber attack and cyber exploitation capabilities, which is there, but also the fact that there is still no true cyber strategic deterrence. So with nuclear weapons, we all know you have mutually assured destruction. Don't use your nuclear weapon because then it'll be used back against you, and then very bad things happen to us both. With cyber, there's always plausible deniability. There's immense room for deception, something I used to be very involved in professionally. There's always a way out of it, right? And so there is no strategic deterrence from hostile cyber activities. We've seen China very active against the United States with very little consequence, right? And they say it wasn't them anyway. We see this all the time. So that's one major factor. And with cyber criminals, it's very lucrative, right? So, of course, with ransomware, we see this all the time, where somebody will basically hijack operations of a hospital, an airport, a retail website, and demand payment. And because you need to have the hospital running or people die, the attacker feels you're more likely to actually pay, right, to unlock. So that's just more and more lucrative. And so it just keeps getting worse and worse.
Yep. Might be a little bit of a curveball, but how would you solve that attribution?
That is a bit of a curveball. I think solving that attribution is, from a purely technical standpoint, not entirely impossible, but very, very difficult, certainly for the commercial sector. For nation states like the United States and some other select nations, I can't speak to classified capabilities, but generally nation states are better equipped to...
Better funded.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They can uncover some of these things. So they can see things that they're more sure of that the private sector isn't. But I think that for the most part, you have to look at the effect. It's going to be a combination of measurement capabilities, not just technical, but what was the effect, who did it benefit, and then you're still subject to the potential for false flags or deception and so on and so forth, which is why it's so hard to...
Retaliation.
Exactly. So it's so hard to build that deterrent. Yeah.
It's a fascinating issue. I don't think we're going to be fishing in the next decade at all. So EclecticIQ, what's the mission in the world?
Our mission is to, like I said, help enterprises stay left of boom. And increasingly, as a European company serving global organizations, or I should say serving organizations globally, we are always moving, we hope, faster than the adversary, right? So we are always trying to understand where the threat landscape is moving. For example, who is using AI? How are they using it? Are they not using it? How can you assess your threats and your actual vulnerabilities, which is how you get risk, right? More effectively. And one of the things that I think is a bit different about us that some of our customers like is that we are a little bit more independent, right? So as a European company with an American leader, but we are a European company, and I'm married into Europe. That's what I usually say. So I'm worried about both sides of the ocean. We don't have the same sort of biases that some of our American competitors have, right? So we have a lot of American customers, but we also have a lot of international customers that, for whatever reason, are looking for less dependence on U.S. technology.
Yeah. Okay, I really like looking at that threat landscape and really understanding the threats before they happen. That's something that I'm really passionate about. All right, I'm going to try and put that into a sporting analogy, and correct me if I go wrong here, but it really sounds like EclecticIQ gives cybersecurity teams the same edge as elite athletes. A little bit of intelligence, a little bit of coordination, and speed. But it's not about stopping every play. It's about reading the field and anticipating their next move and really outplaying the competition. Is that pretty close?
I think that's right, and that's because fundamentally, you will never stop every play, right? You will be breached, you will be attacked, and most of the advanced organizations out there in 2025 say assume breach, right? Because no matter how good your defenses are, no matter how good your awareness is, I mean, look, in my home, I have multiple layers of defense. But if somebody really wants in, they will get in, and it'll probably be from an angle or a vector that I didn't think about, or that they simply brute force, right? So even if you are using defense in depth, if you are using layered defense, it's not about, like you said, it's not about stopping every play. It is about anticipating what's the next play. So I like baseball still, even though I live overseas for the last 6 years. I like baseball, and so you're not going to, well, usually anyway, you're not going to stop the other team from ever getting a hit. You may have the rare no-hitter, but for the most part, you need to have a good outfield. You need to have a good offense.
Good catcher.
Exactly. Yeah. Good catcher. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. Another question that I really like to ask is funding and Series A, B, and C. How are you guys looking at that?
Well, like I mentioned, it's a little bit different between the U.S. and Europe. So for us, we have, and also, so just to rewind for a second, we were formed in 2014.
Okay.
So we were one of the early pioneers in the threat intelligence platform space. There are a few others that formed around the same time, but we were an early innovator in our segment. So we've received quite a lot of funding over those years, but a lot of that is spent over time. So now we mostly focus on the revenue we bring in. We try to maintain a very efficient team. So everyone that we have is hand-selected, and for us, we don't like to absorb hundreds of millions of dollars because we think that that's just more money that you owe someone else later.
Yep. We have to go out and sell.
Exactly.
Yeah, it makes it extremely difficult. All right, it wouldn't be an interview without talking about AI.
So for us, there are a few things. There's how you use AI internally. There's how you see threat actors using AI, and there's how we use AI in our product. And so with our product, we saw early on, and by early on I mean with, I would say, really GPT-3. So for those who have really been watching, these LLMs, these large language models, have been around for a number of years. It really goes back to Google's transformers and all that. But it was really around GPT-3, I think in late 2022, where things really hit big. And we saw early on that a lot of companies were developing chatbots, right? So it's going to be a little bit judgmental here and say kind of dumb, features where you can kind of ask something mostly useless, kind of like in your travel booking app, and it's just a headache and you don't really get anything out of it. We didn't want to do that. We wanted to find the use cases where we thought AI would really help. And fundamentally, we are a data aggregator. So we deal in data, and we translate data into intelligence and then insights for you to make decisions about the cyber threat landscape. And so we knew that there were opportunities to more efficiently identify useful data to then translate automatically using a large language model. And so one of the things we do is we have a feature called Intelligence Compass, which allows you to input nothing proprietary, but a little bit about your organization. So think stuff on your website, right? I mean, nothing crazy here. And then and then we automatically correlate that with the threat landscape, and we surface insights that are actually relevant to you, right? So that's one of our kind of flagship features the last 6 months, is really solving the original problem that threat intelligence platforms were meant to solve. And that's something we're very proud of that we've launched. Internally, it's a bit tricky because I want my team to use AI because I want them to be more efficient. I don't believe AI is necessarily coming for everyone's job. I think AI is coming for your job if you don't use AI smartly, right? So you're going to be replaced not by AI, but by somebody who knows how to use AI, knows how to leverage it. And so that's the general worldview we have internally. So we use AI where it makes sense, but you're not going to see us, barfing out a bunch of M-dashes, a bunch of obvious AI-written stuff in our marketing because we leave that human element there. So we may use AI for some formatting, inspiration, areas where it makes sense, but we think that the human is overall smarter, right? And I'm also very concerned for most organizations about how much personal data and proprietary data employees at other organizations could be uploading into the consumer versions of these chatbots, really. So the short answer for how we use it is we try to use it as smartly and safely as we can. And the threat actors out there, so I kind of went last, first, and middle of what I said. The threat actors out there, we're actually not seeing an incredible amount of AI usage yet, but we are seeing that it's easier to write spear phishing emails. It's easier to do a lot of bad stuff.
Yep. That's quite incredible. Great insights there. All right. For someone new to cybersecurity, what's the one thing you would encourage them to focus on to help them or their organization?
I always say the same thing, and it always kind of surprises people, at least in Europe, maybe not here. I always say to understand the business. And when I started at the Defense Intelligence Agency, it was really interesting because we went through this hardcore intelligence analytic training program and learned how to not invade Iraq again with bad intel. Learned all of the analytic methodologies, but early on in the first week, we had a visit from the gentleman who was the director for intelligence at that time. So this was, I don't know, 2007, 2008. And he didn't have slides. And everyone else did. Everyone from all the other departments would all come in and do a half-hour slide deck presentation with all their things for the new analysts and all that stuff, which is fine. But this guy didn't. He said, all that I have is one piece of advice. Follow the money. Know the budget. Know why we're spending on what we're spending on. Know why we're programming the priorities we're programming. And actually, I think it's the same thing for anybody new in cyber now. Because if you don't understand why you're defending your organization that you work for, or who you're defending it from, then how can you succeed, right? It's like if you're a large financial and you're a new cyber person, you're an analyst, or you're even even a SOC analyst, and you're thinking about how do I prioritize threats and how do I know when something that I detect is actually bad. Obviously, if it's malware or something, then it's obviously bad. But I mean, how do I sort through things? And you think, well, I'm a financial institution, so Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, cyber criminals bad. Okay, sure. It means nothing, right? You need to also understand, is there a platform maybe that wires the funds maybe there's $1 trillion a quarter or a day in some cases, really, or a week, that's traversing your network somewhere else. Is there an API there that maybe a threat actor might be thinking about? You need to understand how the business works and why. So that's my piece of advice. Think about the strategy, not just that lower level technical part.
Yep. So really understanding the business. That's your number one takeaway.
Yeah.
All right. Very cool. All right. Before we finalize, do you want to leave us with any final thoughts?
Yeah. So I think you have a global audience, and I'm visiting Washington, D.C. this week. As you know, I live in the Netherlands now, and something that is really kind of talk of the town everywhere in Europe that not everyone in Washington, D.C. or the U.S. hears about is European sovereignty. So this notion of European sovereignty really started a number of years ago, but really has accelerated into overdrive since Vice President Vance spoke in Munich, and I think March of this year, where the Vice President effectively said, look, the United States is responsible for 80-90% of NATO's budget. And President Obama, President Trump in his first term, and now President Trump in his second term has been very clear, you must increase your share of the spending, right? And after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the EU has realized that actually the world is a Hobbesian world. It is still about everyone for themselves. You know, it's not the end of history, so to speak, and even the end of history wasn't the end of history. And so you must get back in gear. And so since that speech, and also in light of some fundamental political differences, I think, between some, not all, but some European governments and the U.S. administration, you really can't go to a single event in Europe related to cybersecurity where there's any sort of policy nexus where you're not hearing this European sovereignty thing where they want to reduce dependence on U.S. tech. So something like 80% of European large enterprises and national governments rely on U.S. tech. Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure, great platforms. That's why they rely on them. They're the best. But they want to, and we're also seeing this in some other parts of the world, like in Asia and in Canada, a lot of large enterprises want to reduce dependence on U.S. tech just to help break down that single point of failure. So I think that's something that might be new to some of the audience.
Yeah, that's very interesting. That's something I've never heard of or thought about.
Yeah, and it's very challenging because the world is so interconnected. So I think the name of the game there is not so much isolationism. You're not going to be able to really build everything from the ground up. I mean, Linux came from Finland, right? So it isn't about going from 0 to 100. It's more about being able to defend yourself and your own security platforms and not be dependent on U.S. or Chinese, for that matter, solutions, although they really weren't using Chinese tech to begin with some exceptions like, Huawei and things like that, which you could do a whole other, podcast on. And the other thing, I think, with holidays coming up, especially here in the U.S., of course, Thanksgiving, Halloween, something that I think about a lot, really more for the audience that is less technical, is you should think about creating a recognizable word or phrase with your family to prove who you are, right? So something that will just lock in. I am who I say I am, and that's because you asked about AI. One thing we are seeing is that it's now very, very easy to create a fake image of you. So you could actually receive a phone call, a FaceTime, a WhatsApp phone call, you name it, that looks like you, sounds like you, and a family member may not know it's not really you. And you should verify if somebody's asking you for money and it's a family member, or saying that they're in an unsafe situation and they need money to get out of it. Ask for that safety word.
Yep, that two-way handshake.
Yeah.
The password or the pass sign.
And you know, a year ago, 2 years ago, I thought it was a little bit crazy to think of that. Now I think I really wish everyone would do it.
That's really great advice. Well, Cody, thank you so much for being on the show today, and a pleasure having you.
Happy to be here.